Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name's Amanda and I'm glad that you could be here today. Today comes with a special video. It actually was a result of some conversations I was having at a recent family reunion. And I was talking to different people about my process, that I'm on the conversion process right now, and I left Christianity, and what did that mean? So if you remember back, my entire family is Christian. So I had a number of people who brought up the topic to me and wanted to engage in conversation. Gladly. I want to share my story so other people can learn from my story. And the big question that I received is, so what's your problem with Jesus? Why can't you just accept Jesus? What is the problem with him now? You were a Christian for 40 years. What's the big problem with him now? So it's not like I have a personal vendetta against Jesus. I had many things that had happened throughout the course of my life thus far, and many learning opportunities that were presented to me, that the story or concept of Jesus as a Messiah just doesn't work for me anymore. I know different things that just don't make that feasible for me. So I'm gonna walk you through, as I was growing up, questions that I had, struggles that I was dealing with regarding Jesus. And then as I was learning more, what came up in struggles. And then when I finally reached my tipping point, what exactly was that tipping point? I've shared before my tipping point of when I needed to leave Christianity, but there was an earlier tipping point where I just had to stop. There's no way I could believe, accept, and appreciate the Jesus that everyone was talking about. So I'm going to walk you through that, okay? So way back in about third grade is when I started having questions, and I would bring them up to people, and sometimes they could answer them in a roundabout way, and sometimes they couldn't. The first question that I had was regarding Jesus and essentially his timeline. So in Christianity, we learned about his birth story, and then we learn nothing until he's 9. Now, some would argue that, well, there was when the 3 wise men came, and that was like in his toddler years. Okay, but he was the child of God. Like, you would imagine something were to happen. Something. Maybe he, I don't know, maybe he was naughty. Maybe he was never naughty. Like, there's got to be something in there. So I'll give you a pass on the birth to age 9, because that's childhood, and perhaps people didn't think what he was doing was important. I don't know, but I struggled with that. But the part I struggled with more was there's nothing in there from the time he's 9 to the time he's about 30 and he starts doing all these amazing miracles. He's baptized by John the Baptist, and a dove comes down and it says, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." And then all these miracles happen. But we don't know anything about him from 9 to 30. Jesus didn't live that long. So that's a huge portion of his life that's just not recorded. It's not recorded. Now, some will say, well, Jesus was a carpenter. He followed in Joseph's trade. Okay, but that's not recorded anywhere. Was he a good carpenter? Was he a bad carpenter? Was he able to do amazing things with this all along the way? Did he help people? Was he a good worker? There's nothing. Nothing. And you would think, if this is the Son of God, if this is the most important person, they would have written something down. Something. So the holes in the timeline was the first thing I kind of grappled with. I couldn't quite get my head around why there were such huge holes and there was nothing written. Even if it was that he wasn't anything special during that time. Did he ever have a girlfriend? Did he have someone he was going to marry? Does he have siblings? Like all those different things that it's just not spoken of very commonly. Now, I know there are some versions of the Bible where they'll mention that Jesus had a sister, but it doesn't say much of anything. Like that's neither here nor there. They discount that completely. Jesus is a standalone figure in most Bibles. But it struck me as odd, the big holes. Because in your history, it's all those little things that make up who you become. I would not be the person I am today if it wasn't for every single little thing that I experienced prior. It would just be different. So I was curious and hesitant and a little bit leery, thinking, either they weren't very careful note takers or they're leaving some things out, whether they're on purpose or they're insignificant in their opinion. But I didn't like the idea that they were leaving things out. The next thing I struggled with was the fact that Jesus reportedly made or performed so many miracles. It just, in that short time period, to constantly be performing all these miracles. And in my head, I was like, okay, but couldn't it be multiple people doing small things? And maybe they're getting exaggerated? Because the first of the Gospels that was written about Jesus wasn't written until 30 years after Jesus died. 30 years. That's almost Jesus' entire lifetime again after he died before they even start recording these things. I would imagine things are not going to be recorded accurately. I would imagine it's very probable that some things get, expanded. In a game of telephone, if you have 10 people, the chances of you starting and ending with the same message are pretty small. If you imagine that they told the story of Jesus orally from person to person over 30 years, can you imagine how many errors or misinterpretations or exaggerations there were in that story? When I found out that the first gospel written about Jesus was written 30 years after his death, that raised my concern level, most certainly. I didn't know that fact growing up, but it was a big struggle. It was a big struggle. Now the next one surfaced after I had already started to question what was going on, question the idea of Jesus, the timeline. I just was looking at it with a more critical eye. I became more aware and then quickly bothered by the fact that most of the service, about 80 to 90% of all the services that I attended at my church, were focused on Jesus. They were praying to Jesus. They were singing to Jesus. They were singing songs about Jesus. They were reading the scriptures specifically focused on Jesus. And for someone that's struggling with Jesus and trying to avoid Jesus and just focus on God, that became abundantly clear, and that only strengthened my concern and my distrust in Jesus. It felt like something was being covered up, and it was it was not sitting well with me. Something was amiss. I just didn't know what exactly it was. So I continued to learn more. I listened to podcasts. I did research. I happened to meet an amazing man who helped me learn different things. He taught me about Judaism and Islam and Christianity, and just we've had lots of great discussions, and he's helped steer me towards different people, or encouraged me to ask different priests or rabbis or religious leaders of different sorts questions to hopefully find answers. And the more questions I ask, the more research I complete, the more questions I have regarding Jesus. So there were more questions, and I'm going to go through them because I want to be honest and forthcoming with you. But when you're already shaky on a subject and you already have problems with understanding it, it's not a firm foundation. So every question, every fact that you have that contradicts any information that you've been told, or is basically pointing out the flaws in what was being told, it chips or erodes away at what once was, to the point where I ended up where I couldn't. So let's walk through them, okay? So the first one that I discovered was regarding Jesus's death. So as Christians, we know that he was arrested on Maundy, Thursday, and he was crucified on Good Friday, and he rose on Easter Sunday, or some version of that. However, I was surprised, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I was surprised to learn that there are different versions of that story. There are versions that have different times of day, different days of the week. Then there's the whole idea of, okay, so Jesus died, he was buried essentially by putting in the tomb, and then 3 days after he was dead, they decide to, okay, I'm going to go back to the tomb, or the gravesite if you wanted to say it like that, and now I'm going to cover him with spices and oils. Not when he was immediately dead, to like initially when I was taught in Sunday school, I was told they put spices on him to help bring him sweetness in the afterlife, help him transition, help him not to have sorrows, not to smell badly, things like that. So that made sense if they were doing it immediately, but they didn't. They did it 3 days or 2 days later, depending on your version. And when I said that out loud and I was discussing with someone about that, it didn't make sense to me. That's the equivalent of me burying a loved one. Then after 3 days, I'm going to exhume the loved one. I'm going to bring them back up out of the grave. And okay, now I'm going to spray them with perfume. That doesn't make sense to my mind. Like, the timeline was skewed on that. So when that was pointed out and I had that discovering, I became even more concerned. I became even more critical of examining things. So, for example, when I was looking at the Gospels, I noted through discussion that each of the Gospels, while we don't know their writer, they were not written to be together. They were written to be standalones. That the book of Matthew was supposed to be the book of Matthew and only Matthew. It was not supposed to have something else with it. And that goes true for all of the Gospels and all the rest of the New Testament, as a matter of fact. However, stories change throughout the Gospel. The birth of Jesus, for example, it changes. In some versions, they have them coming to the stable. In some versions, the wise men are coming. In some versions, they talk that Mary was sent by the angel came to Mary, and Mary was this, but it's not consistent across all of them. And when I was doing more research, it actually was even more startling, more surprising, more soul-shaking that it appears as if each of the Gospels, as they're written, it's almost like they're trying to fix the errors or mistakes in the one that came prior. I'll give you an example. So, example for when they're talking about the lineage of Jesus, which is also a problem that I have with him. But they will talk about how Jesus is the Son of God and that he has no father. And then they say, okay, well, but then Joseph is his earthly father. And then, so they will change different things to make his lineage work. So, point in fact, Jesus' lineage doesn't work. The Messiah, as told by the Old Testament, is supposed to come from the throne of King David. They have to be from that line. Now, the struggle, okay, so Jesus was the result of apparently God impregnating Mary, who was a virgin. So, first of all, your lineage is supposed to be tracked through the Father. If God is the Father, then he has no lineage. He can't sit on the throne of David because he's not a descendant of David. So some have tried to say, okay, well, you can track the lineage through Mary. Okay, first of all, that's not how it was done for anybody else, so that wouldn't really work. And then they try to switch it, and then they show the lineage of Joseph. Okay, but if God made Jesus, then Joseph's lineage doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So we'll take that aside. So some people are able to track back Joseph's lineage and say, for some reason, for argument, that's okay. That's what was supposed to happen. So they can track it back to King David. However, there's a piece that's wrong or misrepresented, I should say. So it goes back through a man named Jeconiah. And Jeconiah, while he had children, Jeconiah was cursed for not following directions from God. And he was told point blank that none of his children will ever sit on the throne of David. So that essentially ends that line right there. You can't make that connection because none of the children will sit on the throne of David. It doesn't work that way. So major problems with lineage. Major problem with his history story of his timeline. It just doesn't fit. And the more I learn, the more I become leery and cautious and more inquisitive and more questioning of everything. Now, frequently, there are Christians who will also quote Bible verses frequently. A favorite of them is to quote Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. That verse is about that there is a child in a mother's womb and he's bringing forth all these different things that are coming. And Christians typically take that verse to foretell Jesus is coming. But it's not. Isaiah was telling his story. Isaiah in that passage was actually talking about a completely different person. Isaiah was talking about Israel. Israel, not Jesus. Which backs up the fact that in the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures or the Torah, whatever word you want to use for that, each of those books was someone's story. So by looking at Isaiah's story or segment of story and trying to spin it on the Jesus angle, it made me wildly aware of how frequently when I was a Christian, we would take a verse and we were essentially looking at the passage through Jesus goggles. We were looking for connections about Jesus. We were looking for something to tell us something about Jesus. And there's an old adage or an old saying that when you're looking for something, you'll see it. So if, for example, if you're looking for a black car, you'll suddenly notice how many black cars there are around. If you get a new bicycle, you'll suddenly notice, oh my goodness, there's that bike, and they're all the same. When you're looking for something, it's much more obvious. But Isaiah wasn't telling a story about Jesus. Isaiah was telling his story. And when you take Isaiah's story and try to spin it to focus on Jesus, you're discrediting Isaiah and what he had to say and teach us. Because they all had something to teach us. Just like we have something to teach each other. But if everything that I'm saying, you're looking for one specific thing about Jesus, it's not going to work. You're going to miss every other thing that I'm saying. So that fact in particular made me astutely aware that I was looking at everything with, I refer to them as Jesus goggles. I was looking at everything to try to figure out, what is this telling me about Jesus, and tying everything back to Jesus. And it's not about him. I had to take my Jesus goggles off and be able to look at situations and informations just for what they are, not with any open expectation or any desire to direct it or find meaning to something else. That was a huge deal for me. A huge deal. I remember crying and feeling extremely foolish and feeling hurt by the idea of being so wrong for so many years. I felt duped. I felt betrayed. I felt hurt at my very core. Because it was something that was very personal to me. And I couldn't do Jesus anymore. It did not work for me. Now, icing on the cake was when I learned that Jesus wasn't allowed to be the Messiah because he came after a time known as the Age of Prophecy was finished. So the Age of Prophecy was when prophets came and were like advisors to the king. So Jesus doesn't fit that, because at the beginning they said that he was like a prophet. So there was no king when Jesus was born. And a prophet didn't come to save everybody. A prophet essentially came to say, hey guys, you're doing this wrong. We need to get back on track. A prophet wasn't necessarily loved because they came to point out that we were missing the mark. We were having errors and we needed to change our ways. And change isn't easy for everyone. So that was just more ammunition to the concept that I couldn't get on board with Jesus. It just didn't work. It did not work for me. And then when I found out that in the Torah, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures, whatever you want to call it, there are specific things that are listed that the Messiah will do, and Jesus didn't do them. He didn't do them on the first go round. He didn't do them when he was raised from the dead. He didn't do them. That blew my mind. It blew my mind that there was this man that I had believed in, struggled with my belief, but I believed in him for 40 years. And the Bible that I was reading in the Old Testament, it says what the Messiah is supposed to do, and he didn't. But we were still giving him that title. We were still holding him in high esteem. That hurt. That hurt. It felt like I had been lied to. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed by the fact that I taught people that he was this amazing man. When at that point, with all those questions, I don't believe he is the Messiah. I don't believe he is the Son of God. I don't believe that he's anything special. I think he was a man. Nothing special. So I had all those experiences, and my head hurt and my heart hurt when I finally came to that recognition. And then my amazing boyfriend told me a story because I love his analogies. I just think they're awesome, and he explains things in such a great way that help me understand at a deeper level, I should say. And he has some amazing videos. I invite you to check out his channel. It's called Blade Talk, BLADE Talk, TALK. And he is able to break down so many topics and explain them in a way that doesn't make me feel like I'm stupid, but it suddenly opens a whole new awareness level. Like, holy cow, I never thought of it like this. And that has actually made me stronger because it's just a different way of looking at things. Anyways, back to the story. So he shared this story about this great, amazing, awesome king. His subjects loved him. He was praised. He did all these great things. And he had a son. And the son was handsome, and the son was witty, and the son was well-liked. And as he grew, the people of his kingdom just grew more and more enamored with the prince. So eventually, the people of the community started focusing only on the prince. They praised the prince. Oh, how great he is. Oh, how smart he is. Oh, how wonderful he is. Oh, aren't we so glad that he is our prince? And they completely forgot and ignored the king. That's very much like God and Jesus. I felt like in Christianity, Jesus was the prince in that story. He's getting all the focus. But it's not him. It's God that needs our focus. So I needed to wipe Jesus out of the equation. I don't want anything to do with Jesus. I don't need him to save me. I don't need him to be a go-between. I care about my relationship with God. So in a nutshell, that's my problem with Jesus. I don't trust his story. I don't trust the facts that I'm hearing about him. And because I have so many problems with Jesus and his story, I don't want to deal with that. I want to focus on God. If I am relying on my soul and my heart and my understanding, I don't need anything coming between me and God. I need God. And that's it. And I don't want to put my trust, hope, and soul in the hands of somebody who I don't trust. And I don't trust Jesus. I trust God. That's my story. And if you have any ways to help me understand, I invite you to come contact me and share with me your thoughts. Because certainly I do not know everything. But I know too much at this point to say that I am Christian. I know too much at this point to say I believe in Jesus. I believe in God. And that's where I'm going to stay focused. So, until next time, take care.